Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with Superlative Podcast. Please listen to aBlogtoWatch's other podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest news and reviews. My guest today on Superlative is Robert Tran. He's the co-founder of UNDONE. Robert, welcome.
Welcome, Ariel. Thanks for inviting me to the podcast. It's my first time.
UNDONE is a brand that I really think aBlogtoWatch brought to the community's attention. Several of the people, including yourself, that of course started the brand, were following aBlogtoWatch, Michael, of course, and Barry. And you worked with us to get the message out there about a lot of your first products and things like that. I think it was, Was it 2017 or something like that? We did an event together. Maybe it was 2018.
Yeah, it was about 2018 in Hong Kong.
Yeah. We did an event together there. And I think one of the things I remember that was so interesting, and I want to talk about Hong Kong a little bit, is we invited aBlogtoWatch audience members there. The people who came, I mean, you could have been in New York City, right? It was such an eclectic, diverse mix of people. People from Asian descent, people from European descent, people from other, variety of parts of Asia. I think there was a few Americans there as well.
Yeah, just a mixed bunch.
And that, I think, really defines, it's over now, unfortunately, but an era of Hong Kong, which is why during that era is really one of my favorite cities. I think my first question is, what makes Hong Kong a special watch town? It has a very special history with watches. Talk about Hong Kong as a watch town.
Well, absolutely. Hong Kong has always been the trading hub for Asia. For watches, right, for longest time. Obviously, before China get very affluent on, the economy, Hong Kong has always been the center of the hub as an international city. And watches and luxury goods, it's where, the trading go very big. So every single brand on the luxury side first established their Asia presence in Hong Kong. So I think inherently it's one of the, bloodline for Hong Kong in terms of the watches world. And that's very interesting for us as well.
So Hong Kong has been a trading hub. And, I think if you had traveled there, you recognize that, you walk every couple of blocks and you see Rolex signs everywhere, sometimes on the same street, sometimes across the street from one another.
Yeah.
And Hong Kong was also, as you said, a place where the West interacted with Eastern manufacturing. So a lot of the Western companies, European companies that would produce components in China originally, as I understand, went through Hong Kong because it was the place to do business. It was too difficult to go to mainland China and figure out. Hong Kong served as a crucial spot for the luxury industry, not just to sell watches, but to make watches, right?
Absolutely. I think, because of the craftsmen, from all the luxury brand as a service center, at least for Asia, has to be set in Hong Kong. So a lot of the skill set was also developed at that point as well. But, to be honest, as China moved forward on the Industrial Revolution, it also upgraded a lot of the manufacturing capability and facilities in terms of, what they do on efficiency and also manufacturing setup. So Hong Kong, over the years has gotten a lot more expensive as an international hub. In fact, it's, one of the most still today, depending on which survey you're talking to, is still the most expensive city in the world. So therefore, a lot of the craftsmen and also the service center start developing, their prototype center and also the R&D in across the border, which is we call Shenzhen area. So, naturally it become, one of the most fascinated supply chain and manufacturing hub, not only for the watch industry, but basically for a lot of the industry in the manufacturing world, including clothing and everything.
That's interesting. So you're saying that Hong Kong originally was the place where a lot of the stuff was made, but as the city became, of course, much more densely populated and much more expensive to live in, that became, in a sense, outsourced further out. But still, because it was difficult for Western entrants to penetrate it, a lot of that business still went through Hong Kong.
Absolutely. 100%. Even till today, to be very honest.
Yeah.
But, again, China has created a massive supply chain and manufacturing hub that is proven to be very effective. So as long as the quality control and the management skill set it's intact, it is still one of the most efficient arena in the world.
It's not talked about a lot in Switzerland, and sadly so, I think. But still, a lot of the componentry that goes into Swiss-made watches is produced in China. And this is not, again, they see this as being a point of shame where it is really not. The reality is that cases, bracelets, dials, hands, even movement components are produced on scale more effectively, more efficiently in Asia than they would be in Switzerland. They can be, of course, made in Switzerland, but they would make watches cost all that much more. I just think it's interesting that even though there's an era of transparency, or at least a supposed era of transparency in the watch industry, still so many of them are shy to disclose the global nature of the watches in terms of how they're made, even though they want people around the world to buy them. That's sort of how funny it is, right?
It is in many ways, to be very honest, right? I studied manufacturing engineering. So operational research is actually my specialty.
What does that mean exactly?
We do what we call, all the process management and all the supply chain management and obviously manufacturing sort of excellence. And, I'm a little bit older. So, I was sort of educated in a generation when, Japanese total quality control was on top of its game for the manufacturing world. So we study every aspect of these so-called, operational research. And China has took advantage of that by opening up, 20 years ago. And a lot of the talent from Hong Kong also, started those, excellency center in Hong Kong. But especially the supply chain is where, it's second to none for all the components. So yes, it is very, horizontal and vertical at the same time for the watch industry. And because all the brands are there, so all the craftsmen and all the service center have those kind of capability pre-installed as a history.
And we'll talk about how UNDONE got to take advantage of that. But I want to say one more thing on the point that I think is really, really crucial. Switzerland is famously inflexible. And what they do, if you look at it carefully, is they'll make the same movement, the same case for decades, right? They'll do that really, really well. They'll have the proudest and most beautiful cases that were engineered, 37 years ago. But it wasn't until they experienced some of that more agile, high quality, rapid manufacturing that allowed the watch industry to create the variety of cases and dials and bracelets and things like that, because for the longest time, they would just make the same thing. So I think that it's important to give credit to, the types of operational processes you're talking about for making watch variety as we know it possible. Because again, the culture in Switzerland was, well, as long as it still works, let's not try anything new, right? And that flies in the face of novelty a lot.
Well, but in the world of watchmaking, Swiss is still, second to none for many reasons, right? It's the tradition, it's the craftsmanship. But, honestly speaking, a lot of these watches, I'm not going to name names, even the top big brands, they're producing millions of watches every year. You're talking about millions. So it's no longer precision and craftsmanship anymore. It's operational excellence. And today's precision on manufacturing engineering, it's as good as it gets. I think, to be honest, we're moving into an age of computer science and AI and automation. So these technology on manufacturing engineering on the type of precision and efficiency that is needed, it's pretty much on the plateau. I mean, there's not going to be any significant more quantum leap, no matter what we do. But it's more probably environmental technology that would change the game. But so in terms of material science, in terms of craftsmanship and operational efficiency and cost to manufacture, it really doesn't get any better these days, no matter where you do it.
I definitely agree. And I'm so glad to talk a little bit about that, because I always get so fascinated when I go to these factories, because it's a whole new world for me, because it's like I understand how they work, but the almost the magic of how they're produced in terms of how these assembly lines get imagined, how the processes, there's like, it takes 37, I'm using the word 37 against a number, but all these steps to make a case. And it takes a lot of study figuring out, well, how do you make these things? How do you drill that hole? Do you polish this part first? Do you cut this part first? What kind of drill material do you use? It's like so much crazy stuff that goes above and beyond watchmaking, and really is the heart of the manufacturing complex, which makes all this stuff possible. Well, that's a good foundation for the background. Talk about creating a business plan and a business, around 2014 when the company came out. Must have spent a few years before that developing it. Yeah. Why did a startup watch brand sound like a good idea?
We are probably a very particular species that is very different from any other watch company. In particular, I don't come from a watch background. I'm an engineer. I came from the software tech background, and that's where my life was trained to be, even when I studied in the States, on colleges. And then back then, I still remember we were working for a pretty, strong software house on database engineering. I probably cannot name names today. The company was also sold to one of the giants, for $5 billion probably 10 years ago. So back then, my co-founder and I actually worked for the same company as software engineering. But, both of us just love watches. Michael, which is also known for as a co-founder for UNDONE, which he has mostly been the face instead of me, because he's sort of a watch lover for vintage watch. And he started his hobby to do restoration for Rolex watches. And a lot of the craftsmanship that, him and his network just echo and recreate the stuff because, when you do vintage restoration, it's very hard. The original manufacturer either don't accept your order or they would take forever, even if they're willing to take your order. So a lot of people don't know where to fix it. So he was one of the few in Asia that really started that kind of service, especially for the Western world on that. So he loves that. And then I talked to him and said, whoa, okay, this is really very interesting, fascinating, not only as a, collector, but as a restoration person. And we started tempering, in-house on customization, on coding technology and dial customization. Back then, I don't think people really do that at all. It was more of a hobby for us, just for ourselves. And because of my software background, I'm like, hey, it's time to try, e-commerce. And back then, again, for watches, nobody really even talked about e-commerce. And Shopify, even back then, wasn't, it was just started. There was no specific module or feature that caters for what we call customization. So we tested it. It didn't work because you have to make a lot of the changes. And even people like Shopify back then don't want to cater for us. So we write our own code and produce our own site. We were really one of the first original self-coded e-commerce site that does customization for watches. And that's really how we started. But it was all fun and games for us. We didn't even come up with a business plan. We said, hey, we love watches. We like to do cool things. So he took on the watch design and manufacturing part. And, I took on the coding and the tech side. And we were talking about how to use, Google and Yahoo back then to do customer acquisition. People have no clue what, algorithm for doing customer acquisition looks like on the internet. So it's really unique. Unlike any other watch company, we don't even have retail experience. That's how we started.
That's very interesting. I appreciate telling the story about how you come both from a tech background and you sort of split the job. You're like, I'm going to make the website, you're going to make the watches, and we'll see what happens.
Correct.
On the website side, what was it that made you believe that if you had the right platform, you'd be able to be successful selling watches to people online? And I guess the important thing to say is the alternative would be having other people sell it for you, or I guess using some of the established platforms, other watch stores and things like that. Why did you feel that making your own platform would give you a special power, special edge?
It was like any other startup. We don't know. We just felt like, hey, we love the idea ourselves. We don't know if the world like it, but we think there are probably someone out there that would also enjoy what we do, because we felt that by doing a direct consumer arrangement, we can do a watch that is much cheaper than some of the brands out there, because to be honest, we don't have branding. We don't need to set up shops. We don't have to hire people, nor do we know how to do that back then. So, but just doing internet to promote our stuff, we wouldn't want to give it a try. But it's tricky, right? Because back then, even when e-commerce, kind of started with Amazon and everything, no one's trying to sell a $200-300 product, let alone say a watch. You never touched it. You don't even know, who manufactured it. And there's a little company from Hong Kong, are they even real or fake, right? But we thought, hey, just be honest and try to do stuff. And if people like it, we'll do it bit by bit. And so we kind of started that without, again, knowing what's up. But, it was a good try from a technology point of view. But we did a first marketing gig that actually gave us some good credibility. It was a crowdfunding play. That was where Achilles Urban actually made this recognition in the market. We done that by doing a crowdfunding play. And that's how we kind of also established a bit of credibility to begin with.
So Kickstarter was a tool to get your name out there and get known.
Yeah.
It wasn't per se necessary because you already had some of the operations set up. But
correct.
But that was a time where Kickstarter offered an interesting visibility and a sort of strange legitimacy. It's like if you were going to start up as a company but didn't go that way, people didn't know what to make of you. Like, what? You don't need backers first? You're just ready to sell? It's kind of funny. It's dwindled out a bit, but it had its purpose, of course. There's something that I noticed about Undone that I really want to get across in this podcast because it's fascinating to me, and it has to do with the product itself. You mentioned, the first watch, and if you sort of look at Michael, Michael's a restorer, but he's also sort of he likes toys, and he's also a modeler.
Yeah.
And many of the watches, if you had to sort of think about it, are like a toy version of a much more expensive watch in fun form. And I say toy in a very pleasant way. He takes a lot of popular vintage themes and creates a brand new watch that's not particularly expensive, but that has some element of a more expensive thing. And you've seen that in, a lot of stuff from the Kili looking sort of like an old chronograph, from some of the age stuff you do. There's the cartoon stuff you do. There's some, stone dials and things like that. The watches are very good because people who really like watches come up with them. And they're fun because someone that likes to put together watches came up with them. There's a very special set of skills that allows someone to understand a watch like this would be nice, because I've never seen another company come at watch design, expensive or not expensive, with this particular type of mentality. And I believe that explaining it this way should help people, at least for the first, several years of the brand, understand what was the thinking. And I'd love to know what you would add to that, because of course you were there and I'm just sort of guessing, seeing it from afar.
Yeah, that's a very, accurate, DNA of us. And I think, to be honest, the DNA was because of the fact that we both are founders, right? And we both actually were engineers. So we're always very curious on the engineering side on how to put things together, what the hell's going on, what is the right process, how can we make it better and more efficient. And you're like, he's a toy guy, right? No matter if it's vintage watch or vintage cars, hi-fi. I mean, he just plays with all the toys that, some of the guys really like it. And then on my side, I really love the concept of customization, because even back then, both of us felt that a watch is not really about telling time anymore. It's really a personality. It's also where we think, the tagline, we still kind of use it today. It's individuality matters, right? We want to show, whom we should be and what matters to us. And, so that's why customization was at day one of the DNA for this watch. But, we both as an engineer, we say, hey, we've got to have a very good quality watch. We're not going to be anywhere close to the Swiss guy, but we will be a good quality. We don't want to be a toy watch from that angle, but we want it to be fun and we want personality. So we say, hey, there's no one doing that. I'm more coming from the brand side. Watch folks back then are still very either legit, very conservative, and, very proud of the heritage or quality. And if you want to be fun, people say, hey, this is not really a watch. Why even talk about it? But we want to do something a bit different and say, look, let's try. If we fail, at least we try. So that was the mentality back then when we started this.
I remember some of the early customization or personalization features, and I don't remember all the details. I want you to remind us a little bit here. But if I recall correctly, you could ostensibly customize like the dial, get it printed, all this crazy stuff for not a lot of money. And you guys were doing it in-house. That's how you were going to get away with it. Explain what you had originally set up that I actually think was great, but I don't think enough people understood how to approach it. But just how customizable and how inexpensive was that at the launch of UNDONE?
It is, to be honest, to me is pretty costly as an, sort of startup e-commerce watchmaker, because our cost base, to be honest, even whatever watch that we're selling, our cost base is almost at, 30 to 35% cost of goods of the product.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, that is not even including, marketing. It's another 30, sometimes 45%. So we were making a loss all the time. Right. So we weren't one of the big guys who turns out, hey, why don't you manufacture 100,000 pieces so you can renegotiate, with the supply chain and everything. We don't have those luxury. We don't do like 5 or 10% cost of goods. We're like 30 to 35. And people look at us like, what are you doing? Are you guys even in the watch industry? It was like, well, no, but we believe we can get the marketing, from 40% down to maybe 20. And it's proven, internet marketing has a very effective, data proposition. So we were able to predictively figure out if we have a sensible sort of an acquisition model from there. But we also know that in order to get a recurring customer, just being a good watch, it's hard. We need personality. We need people that can, something that people would echo. So how do you get people to buy like 4 watch a year? If they were just telling time, it wouldn't work. But because there are different reasons for buying the watches, so we think, it makes sense to do total customization. So we were, every part of the, what we call, manufacturing, from assembly to buying, we actually bought a couple of UV printing machine that was not designed for dial watches. It was designed for textile, paper, metal printing, and we modified that. And we used special inks and stuff like that. And it was like countless of failure before we say, hey, this is the right mix of, customization. And also we tried different materials and stuff like that. So it was like a R&D house. Not knowing where it's going. So, but it was really how this came together, as well.
You, at some point, you had to abandon all that customization. At least I don't see it on the site anymore. I think it's been a number of years. And I think it's interesting because other companies, even at the very high end, get very excited about bespoke customization. They love the idea of customers coming to them and doing all this wild stuff. So it's very common at all price ranges. But what I find is that the customer is far less capable of choosing what they like and far more intimidated by the process than someone who's more comfortable or an enthusiast. So the percentage of people who even engage in it is low. Talk about when that sort of realization struck and some of the things you were feeling at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it took us a few years to really look at the consumer behavior from a data perspective to really focus on that, right? To begin with, we love the idea of customization, and we're doing it every day. Every part of the watch, from dial to hands to even case to
because it's still available. It's still available,
right?
Yeah.
But the reality, is when we look at the data on an average, right? every month we just review the customer data, and it's very interesting. Those who started the customization on the site, because we track everything, 80% end up not buying.
Yeah.
And we actually talk to a lot of the customers, hey, what's going on? We gave you all the flexibilities. And, we did survey and we collect data. The reality is the following. Customer comes back to us and say, look, we love this concept, but you know what? Every time when we go start doing that, we always think, oh, wow, it just doesn't look good. There's always a better one. The guy who did it on the other side or some of the collaboration you did, it's actually better. So it's always like at the last moment, we can't choose it. Is it green? Is it red? Is it this logo? There's gazillion of variable that people don't make decision. There are a few. There's always an artist and someone who's very detail-hearted. When they want to do stuff like that, it will come through. We do entertain those a lot, but majority of the consumer in general appreciate the concept, but they're not going to put the effort to finalize it on their own. So we now still have those capability for those who want to do it, but the fact is majority of the community wants, these or what we call, predetermined models or, developed model with some of the, collaboration and customization that makes life a lot easier for them to choose. But we do it in smaller batches so that, we don't overwhelm the community from that perspective.
Thank you so much for sharing that experience. It's much as I anticipated, but I want to sort of explore that psychology a little bit more because I think it's so fascinating. The higher end brands, the ones that do this for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, when it comes down to it, when they say that they collaborate with the client, really what they're doing is getting to know that client. What do you like? What do you not like? And then they bring them suggestions. And the reality is that unless, as you said, that person's an artist and knows exactly what they want, which is not most customers, they basically want options that are already good. And then they want someone to be the tiebreaker. I can't choose between option A and B. That's right. Shopkeeper, who I've been chatting with for the last hour and whose opinion I ostensibly trust, what should I go with, A or B? And that's really how this is done because they want something beautiful, but they go and they spend money on something beautiful because they themselves cannot create beauty. That's the feeling that they have. They are spending money on something more beautiful that they could come up with. And that's the service that a lot of, luxury brands offer. So it's so interesting when you sort of realize that even though you had really good intentions about giving people individuality and what they want, which is ultimately difficult for them to put a price on.
Yeah, and the reality, a lot of good brands, they do have, awesome designs and good creativity behind that. So it's a lot of effort and consumer value that. So that's why every time when they have good designs or good collaboration, consumers say, hey, I'd rather go for what you have sort of, pre-selected because I trust your taste and I trust your, craftsmanship from that perspective. And that is a fact, right? But, I think having choices, for these, quality base, it's also important. These days, we're seeing a lot more, community. I use the word community is because it's just more than individual. Sometimes the like-minded community would like to work together on offering something for the community. And customization technology is pretty good for that angle on a B2B perspective.
That ended up working out really well for you on the collaboration side of things because you were able to take that customization and ostensibly make not just one piece, but a whole series of them. So you're able to apply that technology in a very meaningful way. From a business perspective, how important did the collaboration watches, whether they were licensed or not, end up being for UNDONE today?
The first, I would say, 5 to 6 years, it was sort of when we started the business from 2014 until probably 2019 and so forth. Our collaboration business and our what we call the inline watches, these urban vintage Killy watches and so forth, right? These good design. It's sort of a 50-50. arrangement for us, right? There's 50% of these customers, they don't want anything fancy. They just want a, decent quality watch with reliable, manufacturing, and brand. And they would just put a bit of what we call personalization. Maybe the name, the date, and some usually have, family photos and stuff like that. They cherish that a lot because, like I said, time is not just time. It's what you remind yourself. And that's also why we call it Undone. It's also, for me, it's a way to remind yourself, there's so much to do in life. Just remind yourself every now and then what your purpose and what your, perspective in life should be, and I think that's very important. The other half of it, 50% back then was, we had great success with, Warner's, right? The Batman watches and all these. These are what we call the community of the like-minded who loves those value or the IP. And they just come in, a community and they love it. So it's sort of a 50-50. Arrangement for the first 5 years. But, to be honest, today we see the line skew a bit more on I still use the word community or collaborative element. Right now it's more 60-40 now.
So mostly of the collaboration watches?
Yep, mostly of the collaboration. But the inline watch, again, I want to, say that even for us, we have like 3 types of inline watch, right? The urban, the base camp and the aqua, right? The non-collaborative version, people still, do a bit of personalization. It's almost 65 to 67% of the customer do personalization before they purchase the watch.
Hey y'all, Peter Cho here from Jack Mason Watches. If you don't know us by now, we are an independent watch company based out of Dallas, Texas, with a focus on building luxury-grade watches here in the United States. I started this brand with other partners back in 2015 to fulfill a desire and passion of establishing our own legacy right here in Texas. With over 20 years of traditional watch design experience in the United States and Switzerland, we guarantee that each Jack Mason watch is 100% designed in-house, and each component of the watch is unique to us. We don't use any off-the-shelf parts, which has been a strict practice since day one. Heading into a decade of business in 2025, we have plans in place to raise the bar and continue to push the boundaries in establishing heritage in Texas and making our mark in American watchmaking for many more decades to come. For more information about the brand, you can visit us at www.jackmasonbrand.com, or you can follow us on social media at Jack Mason Brand, and also find us on YouTube.
The collaboration watches you've done have come in many, many forms.
Right.
And that means there's different styles. Sometimes they're as simple as having a logo on the dial. Sometimes they're a complete variation on a model you have, or you're not even sure what the underlying watch is. So you've seen a lot of different styles of collaboration watch. And there's been this larger question that I've been asked many times. Are collaborations still a thing, Ariel? Will they continue to be popular? And I always say yes. I say there's going to be a lot of experimentation, but ultimately I think it's a good, we'll call it a formula, if you will. It's sort of a series of formulas. But which of the types of resulting watches in terms of how the design is laid out do you find is commercially successful? My guess is it's the prettiness of the watch is often more important than the collaboration itself. Maybe I'm wrong, meaning if it's a popular entertainment property, but it's not a great looking watch, it won't do as well as maybe a artistically nice one. What can you teach me about the actual successful execution of a collaboration watch?
Yeah, we've learned that also very much ourselves to begin with too, right? When we work with these, like you said, either a IP licensing agreement or a cultural concept that, the IP has probably expired or the concept is not patent. We really start from why we're doing this as part of the community development. Do we do this watch because it's just a good logo and popular one? That's not how we started. We started because, hey, this particular, licensing or this particular culture, it's something that is meaningful to us. When I say us, is, me, Michael, or even a lot of the team member, they would come in and say, look, well, I love this, Batman, for example. They're like, hey, I love Batman. I love what, the movie is doing. I love what it stands for. I wish I could be Batman, for a day to do something special. So we really come from that angle and say, look, why do we love that stuff? By loving what we do, then we go into a storyboard. Almost every single collaboration process that we do sort of, a lot of concept design, PowerPoint, storytelling before we even have the watches. And so it's all the, sort of elements that we think, why are we doing that? We have to answer that to ourselves. Sometimes to be honest, we don't even know if the community echoes, but we just do it inside because we do believe in it. And even if it's a smaller group, let's say only 100 people loves it, and we just do that, for the heck of it. We never produce watch that do a very detailed calculation when can we sell 2,000 or 5,000 of them? What is the survey before we do it? We just say, hey, we love this concept. We had a very good design called Simple Union. It was the philosophy of wabi-sabi in Japan. It's like, hey, imperfection is perfection. That's a Japanese concept. And we love that concept. We took a lot of these sort of also, discontinued fabric for the straps from, 200-300 years ago. And we created the special dial and so forth. And, and then we spread the message. The good news is so far, we do that with a lot of content because it's internet driven. So people see the content and understand a lot of the concept behind that, and they actually echoed it. So we built the community like that from that angle. And yeah, it's not so much just a beautiful watch. It's what is the meaning behind the watch that we a lot more focus on at this point.
From the beginning, a lot of the collaborations seem to focus on a Japanese consumer, some of them very specifically so. Japan, of course, is a very large market for watches, but I haven't seen a lot of countries other than Japan so heavily focus on special models for Japan. I guess it's a natural question, why was the Japanese market of such interest at this price point? Were you doing particularly well there? Did you want to do well there? Obviously, there's a bigger story about Japan later, but talk a little bit about that.
This is a good one. As an Asian, to be honest, Japan has always been one of the fascinating culture for us, from an Asian perspective. And there's a lot of good craftsmanship and there's a lot of respect for philosophical, culture from that angle. So we kind of chose and say, hey, like I said, what is the meaning behind these products? And we always look for the meaning first, right? Whether that is a particular movie or particular IP or particular culture or even entertainment. And we echo with that. So we chose those culture and start talking to that community or the relevant ecosystem before we start designing the watches. So I think from that angle, we were based in Hong Kong. As a startup company back in 2014. And, between Hong Kong and Japan, it's also quite close. So I kind of set up the Japan arm, probably a few years right after, we started the Hong Kong arm, trying to get more, creativity and more design element going between the two culture from there.
Did you find that other places were like, hey, make watches about us? Like, was the focus there inspiring to others? And I guess the larger question is, are these collaboration watches advertisements for other collaborators who might say, hey, I'd like to do that? I've always wondered how they sort of lead to one another.
The internet, I believe, because I'm from the technology sector, it's really a perfect platform for creativity. And we invite what we call creators or partners to join forces to tell the story together. So by doing, it more effectively as a content-driven program, we think that's the best way to tell stories. And, to be honest, right now, if you look at how the social media, it's affecting the world big time. Sometimes you don't even know what's, a real news or a fake news anymore. But it is a fact that, telling story from the internet, it's actually the right way or the most efficient way to put some of the creativity out there so that the like-minded community actually enjoys and understands. So we see that we're also a platform to echo that.
The collaborations, of course, run the gamut, but I think there's a big distinction between the big intellectual property franchises you work with, Disney, you mentioned Warner Brothers, and individual artists, small little shops and things like that. What are some of the differences between working with them, the highs and lows of a small, be it potentially energized collaborator, very large, maybe not very motivated, but obviously well-known collaborator? Very few brands have really done collaborations with such distinctive types of artistic properties. Help people understand what the spectrum is like at both ends.
Yeah, we deal with both ends. We deal with, licensing, that these are multi-billion-dollar company who have done so much licensing, around the world. But it's interesting. Many of the time on these upper hand partner, the reason why we convince them is the fact that we really sold them on the fact that we want to produce quality watches, but not at, I would say, crazy prices. It's not, our philosophy is never about, buying our watch and showing your status. We weren't about that. We were like, hey, if you buy our watches because you like the meaning behind that and you want to tell people what value or what kind of interest, do you stand for? And so that people know you right away. It's, oh, okay, you like Batman, or, you like Hello Kitty. This is who you are. And I don't think any one of the people who buys Undone and say, well, you've got money, you've got taste, right? But they would say, they would know what is, it's a good quality one, it's a decent one. So for these larger, well-known IP and the big guys, they love our philosophy, even though we're telling them, I'm not going to be able to sell 10,000 watches or 100,000 watches. That's not how we make you money. But we make sure that the people who loves your, content and your brand understand you a bit more than any other watch company, right? And then for the smaller guys, they just say, hey, if we work with you guys, we're willing to give you a pretty significant rev share. So that I think it makes sense for you guys and treat that as your own line. We kind of, I don't know, there's a recently pretty good movie called Air. It's about how Nike, got Jordan, and created the Jordan brands.
Oh, I gotta see that.
Yeah, that was the first movie that tells athlete that, brands are willing to do rev share with them instead of a fixed play. We've always been like that with the creator. Right? You say, hey, let's join forces. I'm not going to, pay you a dime and I, get $1. Let's split that, in a very fair way. It's your watch. You sell that as your own brand. And that's also why, if you look at Undone, we've always put that very tiny Undone, logo or word in the very bottom. We don't even have a flashy logo. If you don't really look at it, what brand is this? So we're pretty understated from that angle.
Some of your watches you make continuously, others are limited editions. How do you decide which watch gets made indefinitely, which is a limited edition? Do you ever regretted it, decided we should make more? I realize that you have to make these decisions, of course. By the time something's marketed, consumers want to know this. But how do you end up making some of these decisions about product numbers? Is it very important to consumers? I've just wondered this because there's lots of watches that are sold out. They won't make again. Others that you ostensibly still make. And how those decisions are made, I think, are very sometimes confusing to consumers.
This is also done by trial and error, to be very direct. When we did our first Kickstarter, that is a good indication of what the market sort of community is willing to support us in terms of number of watches on that model. So since then, we tested with different, I would say, quantities of batches. anything that is collaborative, we really don't do anything more than sort of 1,000 pieces. Most of the cases is between 200 to 500 maximum, because we felt that, hey, it's a very good concept, but we don't want, the whole world, to have it indefinitely. That's not our choices. When version 1 is good, if we think the consumer like it or our fan base like it, we probably want to try version 2, but then it will be a different concept or different storytelling. And we think that's what keeps our brand, a little bit more, valuable, because we don't overproduce. And even to today, we're still very much an independent company. We don't have any big brands behind us. And we do a lot of things, like you said, we rather underproduce than overproduce. That's our current, philosophy right now.
I've always noticed that sense of discipline where, on the one hand, you're extremely liberal when it comes to creativity. Almost no type of collaboration is off the limits. Yet when it comes to releasing too many new cases, too many new movement options, increasing price points, you've been very, very withheld and restrained in a good way by making sure that you have figured out a nice, efficient way of doing things. Don't overwhelm the consumer with too many choices. Don't give them too much price increases. Given how the rest of the industry has increased a lot of its prices, it's by no means every brand. What UNDONE has done in, over 10 years is quite modest. And it's almost like you're still allowing the community to discover, right? Like if you were into Basecamp, the type of person, when it came out some years ago, that same person who's emerging now as a watch lover can still be into it and doesn't have to say, I missed out. It's still a sort of very good model at just a few $100. It's mechanical. I think it's just over $300. It's not like that same value proposition is now $600 and it's no longer good for the novice. And I've seen a lot of other brands do that, maybe a little bit more expensive, but if they had a really good value for like a $2,000 Swiss-made dive watch, that was very good for the person who was ready for that price point. But now that some of those watches cost $4,000, the person coming into the hobby is priced out of it. Even though it's the same watch, it's the same appeal to them, it's no longer a good value proposition. And I think that what UNDONE has tried to do is say, if you are an enthusiast, if you like this, you will never look at these prices and be like, what the hell are these guys thinking about? You always want to be able to be scrutinized by fellow enthusiasts. And they might say, well, the design's not for me, but you're getting a lot of watch for your money. Is that true that that's always the bar that you guys have?
That is very accurate. And, again, maybe we don't come from the luxury industry or the watch industry. To me, it's very simple. We've got the cost of goods. We've got marketing, and we've got a team that's working, pretty hard, but doing stuff that they love. And I need to make sure the team members are happy, whether they're in, Japan, whether they're in Hong Kong, or even when they're based in US, right? So from that angle, I've always kept the margin healthy, even from 10 years ago to today. It's pretty much the same margin level. We try to optimize on some of the stuff by, being a bit more efficient on marketing, digital marketing. We want to, go a little bit, more efficient on supply chain arrangement. But to be honest, we haven't really, again, really safe on the supply chain, because every time we try new material and new techniques and new design, there's so much wastage. And because our batches are small, every time, to be honest, when I do the supply chain, sometimes there's 100 pieces, maximum 200-300 pieces. There's no way I can optimize it from there, to be very honest. But that's not what I wanted to do. It's a really democratize, some of the, decent, I would say decent quality with good, showcase of community watches. And I think that's where we want to, go further on that aspect.
So the industry changed in terms of what luxury watches meant to the mainstream. Obviously, there's a cool down now. And I think that you're in a good position because you once again look sober-minded, right? There was all this craziness around Rolex availability and prices were going up. And all of a sudden, watches were investments to everyone. And everyone kept forgetting that this is the fun thing you're supposed to use your disposable income on. All of a sudden, UNDONE has returned to, again, I hate to use the word sober-mindedness, but you just sort of look like you're doing honest business. But the market always changes. What's different about the market today? Where do you feel you need to adapt? Maybe what are some of the ways you've already changed to keep that edge, to make sure that the enthusiasts still see this as a watch that has them figured out?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. In fact, I think we were a little bit ahead of our time 10 years ago or even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And, back then doing what we call, quality watch with cultural aspect, or, some of these, what we call collaborative model that maybe some smaller community would echo and could not find elsewhere. It's a bit too early. But today, I think in general, for the consumer market, people are looking for something that is more meaningful in terms of what they want, that, really stands for their own value and sell their personality. So we think right now, like you said, a lot of the big luxury guys, they try to solve the equation by doing collaborative model, but it's very expensive. They have awesome design, they have awesome collaborative partners, but not everyone can justify that price tag, unless you're very affluent. We want to still stay at the fact that, hey, you can look good and be, have quality stuff, don't have to break your bank at all. One of the brands that I like and I follow a lot is actually Uniqlo.
Okay.
They do quality urban wear, and now they're moving up, collaborating with all the top designers in the world that sells like $2,000 shirts and jacket. But when you buy the same collaboration in Uniqlo, it's like, $59, right?
Yeah, makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so it's like, hey, then people can still look good, have a style, but, you don't have to be outdated. I think watches in many ways brings out the personality as well. Everyone wants that. And I think today's consumer would echo with that a lot more. And we're seeing, a good growth because of this. And we stand by and we don't change our philosophy even for the last 10 years.
One of the things you told me the last time we chatted was the interesting news that not all, but much of the UNDONE operation had migrated from Hong Kong to Japan, which, of course, is a big market for watches, makes a lot of watches, nationally. And so that it makes sense. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. But talk about how that could change the character of UNDONE for the better, what some of the challenges are of moving to a country that, it is not Hong Kong, doesn't have some of the same strengths. Yeah. Talk about how the movement of the company's headquarters is going to have a huge impact and some of your strategies to maintain the positive things about what you do.
Yeah, as I said, UNDONE already established itself in Japan probably sort of 5 years after we started. But it was more a subsidiary back then because, we think Japan would be an interesting market for us to get inspiration, and creativity from. About 2-3 years ago after COVID, I've also based myself a lot in Japan because, again, in addition to watches, I do a lot of tech business. And a lot of the tech stuff in terms of data, in terms of AI stuff, Japan has gotten a lot more sophisticated. It's also a global market hub for Asia as well. So by spending more time in Japan, I get to realize that there's so much more, I would say, cultural aspect that has not been discovered. And if you look at the watch world, I think recently, this few years, there's a good bit of Japanese independent or micro brand that has really, come out on the top, and people then realize, whoa, it's not only Swiss movement, Japanese movement, or Japanese craftsmanship. It's also, a very unique play, and people love that, right? So I see, from quality angle, from watchmaking, and also from culture perspective, this is interesting. So we kind of moved the headquarters of UNDONE to Japan these days. And then we also try to open up made in Japan model. So we are doing that in Japan already. We haven't shipped those out to the rest of the world. But there's a couple versions that will be made in Japan for the global market soon. So I'm testing different, again, as an engineer, we know the strength of Hong Kong, manufacturing and, some of the China, component development and it's state of the art is good efficiency. But we also, again, because of these cultural aspect and always the craftsmanship, we also want to, develop more satellite hub. And Japan is a hub that would definitely do made in Japan model from. And I'm also doing some test trial for UNDONE on made in Swiss as well. As another, I would say, fun project for us. So, but Japan, it's a home base for us right now.
One of the things that I'm hearing that is making me very happy is not only all the ideas that you have, but how much of it you're executing. Because there's a sort of strange happy accident which occurs from that. The watch industry has always been at its best when it's solving problems in new ways, right? Or solving new problems.
Absolutely.
And a lot of watch brands, when they stopped making tools for like professionals, no longer had any idea what to make. If they had a fashionable creative director on board, okay, they could sort of follow the fashion world and make new watches on that level. But a lot of brands fundamentally have no idea what to make. And when they don't know what to make, they don't do anything. When they don't do anything, they then lack the innovation that everyone always needs, which is basically keeping consumers inspired. Flirting with their emotions, showing them beautiful things, showing them desires they didn't know they had. So by your natural curiosity and that of the other people UNDONE, without really trying to create novelty, you are creating novelty because of your own impetus to make new things. And, every brand needs their version of that. You have it because you're just curious and you want to see, will this sell? Will that be interesting to make there? Will the Swiss one be better than the Japanese one or vice versa? You have all these questions and experiments which lead to all these different products, which end up dazzling consumers, even though that's not explicitly what you're trying to do. But that's what I hear, which sounds so reassuring because you're never resting on your laurels and you're never like, is the watch business just still making watches? Great. Like, that's not enough for you. Comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I always believe, the world of innovation, whether it's software tech or consumer product, it's always very similar. You've got to, have a new way of thinking. You've got to try new stuff. Yeah, the failing rate is pretty high, but, there's no harm to do that. And again, being more tech-based guys with the internet as a platform right now, things are a lot more efficient and we're able to get the feedback the stuff that we're doing right a lot faster, or even the stuff that we're doing wrong a lot faster. So it just makes our product development or our community development a lot more efficient from that angle. We'll keep doing that. I think that's our DNA. We have no plans to do, other stuff at this point. But by resetting, our hub in Japan, I do see a lot of more creativity and also some very interesting craftsmanship discussion. And we'll just let the customer judge, what is the right thing that they would prefer or they don't. And I think that's the right way to move forward for us right now.
We're almost out of time. And my final questions has a little bit to do with communication. You mentioned a lot that there's people who want to have fun, to try new things at UNDONE. You mentioned the word artists and stuff like that. And one of the things we recognize about social media these days and brands is people like brands that seem to hire artists to do pretty stuff, right? That if you are a hub of artisans or craftspeople and that ends up being fun, beautiful things that people can ideally wear, that's a great reason, a way to explain to people what this brand is about or why I might be into it. It sounds like you have to bring more of that story front and center. You're going to have to use marketing channels as well as your own website and places like aBlogtoWatch to tell that story. How is UNDONE going to do that differently, right? Everyone has pictures of watchmakers sitting at desks, putting stuff together. Everyone has fashion shots of people wearing watches and things like that. I feel like you could do something a little bit different to tell some of the behind the scenes story, to get people involved a little bit in the craftsmanship, to sort of romance them on all that so that they can think about that when they wear their UNDONE watch. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. We've always been very low key on the media and marketing all these years, and you know us quite well, right? I'm starting to change a bit more of that, first of all, by joining your podcast so people would know a bit more about us. We would try to put more of the reason why we do these storylines on the content instead of just the finished product. With maybe a interesting video, we would talk more about the reason why we're doing that behind. But more importantly, we're architecting, I would say, a loyalty or CRM program that probably let some of a lot of the fan base or consumer start participating in some of the design process and manufacturing process.
Interesting.
And I don't mind. We'll put out, for example, hey, there's a couple of design or there are different types of material. Can you guys vote for that? And, if the majority of consumer would like that, we'll just make that happen. From our point of view, I think, today's technology as a CRM program is very ready for that. I still don't know why consumer brands don't do that, consumer as part of the designer engagement model. We should. And that's the way that I want to leverage more technology to build what we call an interactive brand, not so much just on the content side, but maybe even on the design and manufacturing process or material choices perspective. I think that would be good for them and us together.
That's so interesting. And it really brings back your tech industry background, because that's the difference between the tech industry and the fashion industry. The fashion industry tells consumers what they want. The tech industry tries to listen to consumers and build what they want and deliver them better services that they ask, that they need. Ultimately, what's best in the watch industry, I think, is one of those artistic approaches that we'll never quite know, but you'll always have to balance both of them.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you so much. This has been the Superlative Podcast with co-founder of UNDONE, Robert Tran. I recommend you go to undone.com to hear the whole story. Robert, anywhere else on the internet you recommend people go to learn more about you or UNDONE?
Oh, we've got our IG. We're doing more on our Instagram these days, but we're coming up with more innovative way, probably on YouTube as well. Like I said, to give more background on this scenario. So give us a bit more time. We're pushing forward. We're rolling out a new membership program that has some of the very interesting feature in the next month or so. So I look forward to hearing from the customer directly from that engagement model.
Robert Tran of UNDONE, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ariel.